The first key turned in the lock of my own front door, and I just stood there on the porch for a second, listening to the deadbolt slide. Mine. The little blue house on Linden Court, with the crooked mailbox and the lilac bush that needed pruning, belonged to me now. 31 years old, and I owned something. Nobody could take it back. Nobody could put my name on a lease that wasn't really mine. Nobody could decide for me. I pushed the door open and the smell hit me. Fresh paint and the lemon cleaner I'd scrubbed the kitchen with the night before. I dropped my bag on the floor and laughed out loud in the empty hallway, and the sound bounced off the bare walls and came back to me. And I cried a little, and I didn't even feel embarrassed about it because there was nobody there to see. I want to back up though, because the house doesn't mean anything if you don't know what it cost me. And I don't mean the money, although that was the part that nearly killed me. I grew up in a house where I was the responsible one, which is a polite way of saying I was the one nobody worried about. My younger brother was the project. From the time he could walk, he was the bright spinning center of everything, and the rest of us orbited him. He was charming in the way that gets boys forgiven for things. When he flunked out of his first semester of college, my parents drove 4 hours to bring him home and made him a steak dinner. When I got a partial scholarship to the state school and worked 2 jobs to cover the rest, my mother told me she was proud and then spent the entire dinner asking whether his car needed new brakes. I'm not telling you this to sound bitter. I made my peace with it a long time ago, or I thought I had. You learn to read a room. You learn that the safest thing to be is useful and quiet, that if you don't ask for anything, you can't be disappointed when you don't get it. I was the family's spare set of hands. I drove people to the airport. I covered shifts. I sent money when there was an emergency, and in my family there was always an emergency. And it was always my brother's. His name doesn't matter, so I'll just call him my brother, because that's all he ever really was to me by the end. A relationship, not a person I knew. By 28, he had 2 failed business ideas and a baby on the way with a woman my mother adored on sight. My sister-in-law, I should say. She had a way of looking at you that made you feel like furniture, like she was deciding whether you'd fit in the room she was redecorating. The first time she met me, she asked what I did for a living, and when I told her I was a dental hygienist, she said, "Oh, that's so practical of you," in a tone that made practical sound like a disease. So that's the soil I grew in, and out of that soil, somehow I decided I wanted a house. It started as a stubborn little thought I didn't tell anyone about. I opened a separate savings account at a credit union across town, one nobody in my family knew existed, and I started feeding it. $20 here, $100 there. The overtime money from holiday shifts. The tax refunds I used to hand straight to my parents for the household. I stopped doing that. I told them I'd had some unexpected car repairs, which was a lie, and the lie sat in my stomach like a stone for a week, and then it didn't anymore. That should have told me something about how relieved I felt to finally keep something for myself. It took me 6 years. 6 years of skipped vacations and a phone with a cracked screen I never replaced, and saying no to dinners out because I'd already eaten, which I hadn't. 6 years of watching my brother get a new truck, a gift, to help him provide for the baby, while I drove a sedan with 200,000 miles on it and a check engine light I'd named like a pet, and the whole time that account grew. Quietly. The way I'd learned to do everything. When the loan officer finally called to tell me I was approved, I was standing in the break room at work with a yogurt in my hand, and I had to put the yogurt down because my hands were shaking. I didn't call anyone. There was nobody to call. That was the loneliest part, honestly. The biggest thing that had ever happened to me, and the only person in the room was me. So I bought myself a coffee on the way home, and I sat in the parking lot of my apartment and let it sink in. I closed on the house on a Friday in October. The leaves were turning. The realtor handed me the keys in a little envelope and shook my hand and called me miss like I was somebody. And I drove straight over to the empty house and let myself in and stood in the kitchen for an hour just touching the countertops. And here's where I made my mistake. I decided to tell them. I don't know what I expected. Maybe that's a lie too. I know exactly what I expected. I expected them to be proud. I had this fantasy, stupid and detailed, where my mother would cry and my father would walk through the rooms nodding and say the foundation looked solid, and for one afternoon I'd be the bright spinning center, and they'd see me, finally, the way they'd always seen him. I planned a housewarming. I sent a little group message with the address and a date, 2 weeks out, a Saturday. I bought a cheese board because I'd seen people do that. I ordered pizzas and a cake from the good bakery, the one I'd never let myself buy from. I cleaned for 3 days. I bought a candle that cost more than I'd ever spent on a candle. A fancy one in a glass jar that smelled like cedar and oranges, and I put it on the kitchen island and I thought, this is what a home smells like. The morning of the party, my mother texted me. I still have the message. It said, "Hi, sweetie, change of plans. Your brother just picked up the new car and we're all going over to see it, you understand. We'll do your thing another time. So proud of you both." Both. I read it 4 times. I want you to understand that I read it 4 times, not because I didn't understand it, but because I was waiting for it to mean something other than what it meant. The new car. The car I later found out my parents had co-signed for, a leased SUV my brother couldn't afford, and the whole family was driving across town to stand in a driveway and admire it. On the day of my housewarming, the housewarming for the house I had bought with my own money, alone in 6 years of silence. Nobody came. I want to tell you I handled it with grace. I didn't. I sat on my new kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets I paid for, and I ate a slice of cold pizza, and I watched the light move across the room, and I felt something I'd never quite let myself feel before, which was rage, not sadness. I knew sadness. Sadness was an old roommate. This was new. This was hot and clean, and it scared me a little. And then, around 4 in the afternoon, my phone rang. My father. He never called. He texted badly or he had my mother relay things. But here he was, calling, and against every instinct I had, I picked it up, because was, the responsible one. "We need to talk," he said. "No hello. Tonight. The whole family's coming over to your place. There's something we need to discuss." My first thought, and I'm ashamed of this, my first thought was relief. They were coming. Maybe they'd realized. Maybe the party was happening after all, just late. I actually started straightening the throw pillows. They showed up a little after 7, all of them. My parents, my brother, my sister-in-law, even my grandmother, who I hadn't seen in months and who I genuinely loved. The only one of them I'd have crossed a street for. They filed into my living room, and I noticed my father had a folder under his arm, a manila folder, and something in my chest went very cold and very still, the way the air does before a storm you can already smell. My mother hugged me and said the house was charming, which is what she says about things she finds small. My sister-in-law walked a slow lap around my living room with her arms crossed, appraising. My brother wouldn't look at me. And my father sat down at my kitchen table, my table, and laid the folder flat and smoothed it with his palm, and asked everyone to sit, please, because this was a family matter. I lit the cedar candle. I don't know why. Something to do with my hands. What my father explained to me in the reasonable, measured voice he used when he'd already decided something was that the family had a problem and I was the solution. My brother was overextended. The new SUV, the baby coming, his last business venture had left some debts, nothing they couldn't manage, he said, as a family. And the thing about being a family, he said, is that you pool your strength. I had equity now, he explained, a house, an asset, and it didn't make sense. It actually wasn't fair, he said. And I remember the word fair landing in my kitchen like a slap. For one person to be sitting on all that security while her brother and his child went without. The proposal, and he actually used that word, the proposal, was simple. I would refinance. Take cash out against the house. There was a number in the folder. The number had a comma in it, and that money would go to stabilize my brother, and in exchange the family would consider the house a shared family asset, something we'd all have a stake in going forward. My mother was nodding the whole time, her hand on my brother's arm. My sister-in-law was watching me with those furniture eyes, and my grandmother was looking at her own hands in her lap and would not raise her head. And that, more than anything, is the detail I can't shake. Because she knew. She knew it was wrong and she'd come anyway. I sat there for what felt like a long time. The candle flickered. Somewhere outside, a dog was barking. And I want to tell you that the old me, the useful, quiet one, almost said yes. I felt her in my throat, the girl who drove people to the airport, who covered shifts, who handed over her tax refund and lied about car repairs to keep one little account secret. She wanted to smooth it over. She wanted everyone to stop being upset. She had a whole sentence ready. Let me think about it. Which is the sentence I had used my entire life to avoid saying the word no. But I'd cried on that floor a few hours earlier. Something had burned off. No, I said. My father blinked. He'd expected negotiation. He'd brought a folder for a negotiation. I'm sorry, I said, and then I stopped, because I wasn't sorry, and I'd spent 31 years being sorry for things that weren't mine to apologize for. I'm not sorry. The answer is no. This is my house. It's not a family asset. There's no comma version of this where I say yes. The room came apart then. My mother's face did something complicated. My brother finally looked at me and he looked betrayed, which I think is the thing I'll remember on my deathbed. The way he looked betrayed, as if I were the one taking something from him. My sister-in-law said, to no one in particular, unbelievable. And my father gathered up his folder very calmly, which was worse than yelling, and said that I had changed, that the money had changed me, that this wasn't the daughter he raised. You're right, I said. It isn't. They told me a lot of things on their way out. That I was selfish. That blood was supposed to mean something. That I would regret this when I was old and alone in my little house with my little life. My mother cried, real tears, and for one terrible second the old me lurched up wanting to fix it. And I held the doorframe and I let her cry, and I did not move. My brother said I'd always been jealous of him, which was so far from the truth it almost made me laugh. Because you can't be jealous of someone you've spent your whole life carrying. Only my grandmother lingered. She was the last out. At the door she put her papery hand on my cheek, and she looked at me for a long moment and she said, very quietly so the others wouldn't hear, "Good girl, lock the door behind us." And then she squeezed my hand and she left, and I understood that she'd come not to side against me but to witness, and that she'd wanted me to win. I locked the door behind them. The candle was still burning. The next morning, I did the unglamorous, practical things because I'm a practical person. It's so practical of me. I called the credit union and put a freeze on my credit so nobody could open anything in my name. I called a lawyer, a real one, an hour I couldn't really afford, and I made sure the house was titled cleanly to me alone and asked what to do if anyone tried to claim otherwise. She told me kindly that wanting a thing doesn't make it yours, and that a house I bought and paid for was mine, no matter how loudly anyone insisted on the word family. I wrote that down. I keep it on my fridge. My phone did not stop. The messages came in waves. Anger, then guilt, then a strange businesslike pivoting where my mother started forwarding me articles about the importance of generosity. My brother sent a long one at 2 in the morning that I read once and deleted. I stopped responding, not out of cruelty. I just didn't have anything left to say into that particular silence, the one I'd been talking into my whole life and never once been heard. What surprised me was who showed up instead. A week after the empty housewarming, my next-door neighbor knocked. An older woman, retired schoolteacher, sharp as a tack, who'd seen the pizzas arrive and seen no cars come and put 2 and 2 together the way kind people do. She brought a tomato plant in a pot and said every new house needed something growing in it, and she stayed for 2 hours and told me stories about the street in the 70s. A coworker from the dental office, hearing I'd moved, organized the other hygienists to come over one Sunday, and they brought a casserole and a set of mismatched wine glasses from a thrift store, and we sat on my floor because I didn't have enough chairs, and it was the best party I've ever thrown without meaning to throw it. That's the part nobody tells you, that when you finally stop pouring yourself into the people who treat you like a faucet, you have something left over, and other people can smell it, and they come, not to take, just to sit with you. I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt. It still does, on the holidays especially when the house is quiet and I scroll past photos of them all together and notice they've stopped including me in the group message at all. My grandmother calls me sometimes on her own from the landline in her kitchen, and we talk about nothing, and once she said, "You did the hard thing, and the hard thing was the right thing," and I had to put the phone down for a minute. People in my position get a lot of advice. Cut them off, forgive them, send a lawyer's letter, show up at the next holiday and make them squirm. I didn't do any of that. I just stopped showing up to be used, and it turns out that's the only revenge that ever mattered, because it didn't cost me anything to give. It only cost me the habit of betraying myself. The lilac bush bloomed that next spring, purple and ridiculous and far too big, and I pruned it badly because I didn't know what I was doing, and it bloomed anyway. The tomato plant gave me 4 tomatoes. I learned the names of everyone on the street. I painted the front door a color my mother would have hated, and I loved it precisely because of that. I think about that night sometimes, the folder on my table, the comma in the number, the candle burning between us. I think about the girl I almost was, the one who had "let me think about it" ready in her throat. I'm grateful to her, in a way. She kept me safe for a long time when safe was the only thing I could afford. But she doesn't live here anymore. This is my house. I bought it with 6 years of quiet, and I'll keep it with one loud word. The family I have now is the one I chose, the one that knocks with tomato plants and shows up when nobody's watching to admire a new car. And every night I come home and the first key turns in the lock and the deadbolt slides, and I am the only one with a key, and that, it turns out, is what home was supposed to feel like all along. I used to think being good meant being useful. For 31 years, I let those 2 words mean the same thing, and that was the quiet mistake underneath everything that happened in that little blue house on Linden Court. When my father set the folder on my kitchen table and asked me to borrow against the only thing I'd ever built for myself, he wasn't reaching for something new. He was reaching for the habit I'd handed him my whole life, the assumption that whatever I had belonged to the family the second they decided they needed it. I'd taught them that. Every airport run, every covered shift, every tax refund I lied was a car repair. Cause and effect. You water a thing for 30 years. You can't be shocked when it grows exactly as tall as you fed it. What saved me wasn't anger, though the anger on that kitchen floor was the spark. Anger fades. What held was something quieter and harder. The morning after, when I called the credit union and froze my credit, when I paid for an hour with a lawyer I couldn't really afford, I wasn't being cold. I was finally using my head the way I'd always used my hands. For years, I'd been smart about other people's problems and foolish about my own. Turning that same clear thinking back on myself, that was the real turn. Wanting a thing doesn't make it yours, the lawyer told me, and I wrote it down, because the reverse was true too. My house was mine no matter how loudly anyone said family. I just had to be willing to know it. And then there was the saying of the word. One word, no. I want anyone listening to understand how heavy that small word was, how many years of swallowed sentences I had to push it past. The girl who had "let me think about it" ready in her throat wasn't weak. She was tired and she was scared, and she had been surviving the only way she knew. But there comes a night when surviving isn't enough, when the candle's burning between you and the people who raised you, and you find out whether you can stand in your own kitchen and mean it. I could. Barely, but I could. Doing right by yourself is not the same as doing wrong by everyone else. My grandmother knew that. Good girl. Lock the door behind us, she whispered, and she was telling me the whole lesson in 7 words. Protect what you built. Be honest about who shows up empty-handed and who shows up with a tomato plant. Use your mind to guard your peace and your spine to keep it. If you take anything from my story, take this. Be the kind of person who keeps their promises and pays their own way, but never let goodness become a leash. Think clearly, especially about the people you love most, because they are the ones who can talk you out of yourself. And when the moment comes, and it comes for everyone, be brave enough to say the small word that sets your whole life straight. The lilac bloomed anyway. So will you.